We're here to honor the martyrs, and as you can see from the way the room is decorated, we're here to make sure that nobody forgets what happened in Birmingham and what has to happen now. So our theme, from exclusion to power, is very, very important. Advancing the struggle for human rights and dignity. And with
she shared with us her analysis of some very, very important policy that has been enacted by this government and its impact on people in Africa around the world. So we bring to the podium Sister Emira.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm telling you, I'm so honored to be here, and I just thank my sister Jaribu for all her hard work and the whole team of organizers. It seems like you all came from Mississippi to shake things up in Birmingham. And I just thank you for your vision, and I thank you for your hard work, and I thank you, Anajamu, for this invitation to be here. I'm Emira. I'm from Liberia. I have to tell you, this is my first time in Birmingham, and I am so thrilled. I learned just in the last few hours that many of you came from far. I know our sisters with the Domestic Workers Union. We have to say thank you for your leadership, thank you for your vision, thank you for your power and dynamism. They were here, most of them coming from New York. But I also heard people drove 12 hours from Chicago. And I just want to say, I am so awed by all of you. Talking to each of you, hearing just some of your stories in just this short bit of time. You are the change that we need in this world. And I'm so honored to be here, to be inspired by you all, because, you know, we need this. We need this. Coming from DC especially, it's like we've been in the belly of the beast. And finally I feel like I can breathe here in Birmingham. So I guess I wanted to begin because Sister Jaribu wanted us to remember the martyrs, right? So I wanted to begin just by sharing, you know, from Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham City Jail. You all probably know these words best, right? But it's powerful because it says, we are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality. You all hearing this?
That's right.
Mutuality. Tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Powerful words back in April of 1963. Powerful words for us today. Because what we are doing, linking the South and the South, is connecting the dots of people's movements, understanding that it's only people connected with a vision of a better world that's actually going to change this planet, going to save this planet, going to protect for our children, for their children, for future generations to come. We were asked to talk for a brief time. There's so much that I was hoping to talk about, but I wanted to take this moment really to share with you some issues that I believe are of serious concern when it comes to U.S.-Africa relations. Now, I know many of you in this room 2 years ago did a whole lot of organizing, thinking, oh, we'll get a son of Africa in the White House, and maybe things will be better. Well, I guess I'm here to say that, you know, things are not very much better. And if anything, they may be getting worse, right? So, how many people have heard about the Africa Command? AFRICOM. A few hands going up, a few hands. Okay. Well, about 2 years ago, it's so funny because it happened in October, 1 month before the election, October 2008. The farewell of the Bush administration was to establish this U.S. Africa Command. And they actually called it a command and control for Africa, right? The Africa Command. The Bush administration created this vision of the U.S. engaging with Africa in a much more strategic way. And who can understand why that Bush administration wanted to engage with Africa in a more strategic way? What's been happening in terms of Africa over the last decade? Anybody know? Chinese. That's one of the things that's been happening. What else? Resources, key.
And diamonds.
Diamonds, we can go on about the resources. Any of you who have a cell phone, you couldn't have it without the coltan that comes from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Right? 80% of the world's supply needed to make cell phones and computers comes from the heart of Africa, the Democratic Republic of the Congo. But really, over the last decade, one resource became primary for the Bush administration. And our sister Jaree will also put her finger on it just now. It's a three-letter word. Oil. It's oil, right? The source of the war in Iraq, the source of the occupation in Afghanistan, and now oil has become the central figure of U.S. interest in Africa. As of 2008, you all with me? As of 2008, Africa had surpassed the Middle East as a supplier of oil to the United States. Were you all aware of that? No. As of 2008, almost a quarter of the oil that's coming to the U.S. now comes from where? Africa. Comes from where? Africa. Comes from Africa. And increasingly, it's countries like Ghana that just discovered oil about a year and a half ago. It's countries like mine, Liberia, they haven't yet discovered, but they're exploring all along the Atlantic coast of Africa. Nigeria, the oil has been pumping since 1956, right? But there are these new discoveries throughout the African continent. And all of a sudden, guess what? The U.S. is even more interested. They call it securing the world against the global war on terrorism. They call it all kinds of things. But at the root, what is it all about? It's about oil, right? Because of the addiction to oil, the U.S. is actually ramping up its interest, its engagement, and you know this well. It's what else is ramping up in Africa? U.S. military power, right? So this Africa Command, established in 2008, came about at a strategic time when the U.S. was seeing new sources of oil, new discoveries of oil in the African continent, and they wanted to control it. But many of us thought, okay, the Bush administration conceived this whole thing, maybe there'll be a way to stymie it, right? And started to organize first on the continent. And I have to say, it is one of the serious victories that we have to claim, that the African countries held strong to say, you want to establish your Africa Command, you can't bring it anywhere on the continent. Okay? This was a phenomenal victory. Because the U.S., we know, has its ways to pressure and push. And thanks to WikiLeaks, we are more privy to some of the ways that we have to pressure. Right? But the African governments held strong. We can talk about this in the Q&A, because it's actually only my country. The only country with a woman president, unfortunately, was also the only country that offered to host the Africa Command. But even in Liberia, people stood up. The Council of Churches stood up in particular and said, we don't think so. They said, who do you talk with? We don't want the U.S. military and all that it will bring in terms of giving up our sovereignty. They watched as President Aristide was being escorted on the cover of night out of his own country, right? And people said no. And I have to say it is a victory because it has held strong. But the reason why I am so honored to be talking with you all today is because there's a serious debate underway now. So the Africa Command, established in 2008, was established in Stuttgart, Germany. But the assumption was it was only the first phase. And over the last few years, they have still tried to put their finger on certain African countries and say, we want to maybe explore moving into your country. Right? Now there is rising pressure, particularly from Republican congresspeople, to say, bring the Africa Command home. So there is pressure from any of you from, I know there's some of you here from Georgia. Who's here from Georgia? Can we see a show of hands? Those of you from Georgia, your delegation is saying we want to host the Africa Command, right? We also have South Carolina delegation saying we want to host the Africa Command. And just yesterday, we had the Virginia delegation saying move the Africa Command to Hampton Roads, Virginia, right? We need to understand the power of our movements to bring change. We need to understand that now, more than ever, with a global recession, Our communities don't need more guns, right? We do not need more guns. And where you see the military rising up, you see an expansion of small arms, and often they are used against innocent women and children. We have to stand up to say no. We've got to begin to understand our interconnectedness, the mutuality of beloved community that Martin Luther King spoke about, right? And we have to know that when we have held strong, have put our hands, linked hands together, that's when changes happen. It brought down the end of the slave trade. It ended Jim Crow, and it's needed today to raise us up from this global economic crisis. It is needed today to raise us up out of a dependence on oil. It is needed today to end this push towards militarism in our lives. So there is so much that you all, as organizers, can do. First, understand this push towards a militarized foreign policy and the impact that it's having on our lives. The increased spending on military might is actually cutting out much needed resources for health, for education, schools for our kids, decent housing, decent jobs. We've got to be able to connect those dots to say, no, we don't want spending on more and more military power to control access to oil and other resources. We need an emphasis in this 21st century on human needs, on human security, what's going to bring dignity and human rights to all. I think the theme of the conference so well captures it. So I'm here to really ask you to stand firm, to connect the dots, to seize your power as organizers, to educate, to join with us in building a movement, a powerful movement that is going to bring forth that better world that we all know is inevitable, right? But it will take all of us inspiring each other, working together, reaching out to all of our artists and poets and musicians to work with us, to begin to envision a different way and a different world. I believe it has to start with ending this push towards militarism. I believe it has to start with all of us taking that one step, right? So I'm going to ask you, a friend calls it DOT. Do one thing, right? Do one thing, and then connect those dots between what's happening in our communities here in the U.S. and what's happening in communities around this world, in the African world in particular. So do one thing, educate others. If you have a newsletter that's going out, particularly if you're in Georgia, South Carolina, or Virginia, please seize the opportunity to educate your comrades about what's happening in terms of U.S. militarism, not only in Iraq and Afghanistan, but also in the African world.